just start. I'll go on your voice.
Good evening. Today, my name is David Jin, and this is my co-counsel Scott Brown, representing the plaintiff in today's case. On September 27, 2013, a terrible accident occurred. Pat Reynolds, 12th year of Metropolitan High School, was on a school field trip when he tragically fell, injured his head, and fell into a coma. Pat Reynolds was attending a school field trip to the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference and was under the responsibility of the chaperone, Mr. Dalton Fisher. Pat was injured while he was out looking for food with his friend Avery Harris. Pat and Avery were out looking for food at 3 a.m. in the morning in order to alleviate Pat's condition of serious dizziness, which is cured when Pat gets food. Having not been able to find any food in the hotel, and having not, with Pat's condition getting worse and worse, Pat and Avery were forced to leave the hotel in order to find food for Pat. It was during this time that the accident occurred. The sole chaperone on this trip, Mr. Dalton Fisher, had not been available to the students when they needed him the most. Even though he knew of Pat's condition, he had not allowed the students any access to food inside the hotel and had not shown any concern or offered any solution to the students when Pat confronted him about his condition. Ladies and gentlemen, today's case is about this chaperone, Mr. Dalton Fisher, a man who had a duty to these students as a responsible chaperone, but had detrimental breach of responsibility, which, if had not happened, could have saved Pat. This case is also at the Smithfield School District, a school district that allowed this haphazard trip to continue. A school district that did not follow its own policies on field trip safety and put 20 students into the hands of a first-time, inexperienced, and non-specially trained chaperone, Mr. Dalton Fisher. Today you will hear from 3 plaintiff witnesses, the first of which is Mrs. Peyton Reynolds. Ms. Reynolds is a strong single mother of Pat, who will testify to Pat's virtues and his responsibility as both a student and as an adult. Next, you will hear from Mr. Avery Harris. Mr. Harris is a good friend and was a roommate of Pat on his night of the accident. He will testify to the journey that he and Pat were forced to take in order to alleviate Pat's condition and the accident that occurred afterwards to his good friend. Finally, you hear from Mr. Bailey Thompson. Mr. Thompson is an educational and school management expert who will give you the specific breach of responsibility that Smithfield School District and Mr. Dalton Fisher had, and the inadequate policies that they both followed, and also the policy that Smithfield School District broke on this field trip. Today, the defense may try to tell you that Mr. Dalton Fisher fulfilled his job to totality on this trip. They may try to tell you that Mr. Dalton Fisher did not have responsibility to these students at this time. And they may try to tell you that Pat and Avery should have tried harder to contact Mr. Dalton Fisher before making the decision that they did of leaving the hotel. Throughout tonight, and when you listen to these arguments, and when you listen to the case tonight, please keep these 3 things in mind. Please keep in mind that Pat and Avery tried multiple times to contact Mr. Fisher, but each time his help did not get them any closer to finding food for Pat. Please keep in mind that Mr. Fisher ultimately was the responsible chaperone and was responsible for Pat and Avery's safety on this trip. And please keep in mind that Pat and Avery were attending the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference. This should be a testament to their maturity and responsibility as both students and as adults. Pat and Avery were very good kids. And today, Pat is in a coma, and it's unclear if he will ever be with us again. Today, we're asking you to find the defense, Bailey Thompson and Dalton Fisher and the Smithfield School District liable for the negligent behavior, which, if had not happened, could have saved Pat. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jin. Ms. Atkinson, you'll be opening on behalf of the defendants?
Yes, Your Honor.
Are you ready to proceed? Go right ahead.
Your Honors, opposing counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my co-counsel and I are here today to represent Smithfield School District and Dalton Fisher. My clients have been wrongfully accused of negligence, resulting in Pat Reynolds falling into a tragic coma. However, after examining the evidence presented and speaking to 3 witnesses, Jameson Manning, Dalton Fisher, and Casey Damon, it will be clear that Pat Reynolds' current state is due not to the actions of the defendants, but to the lack of good judgment expected of him. On the long weekend of September 27th to September 30th, 2013, Dalton Fisher took 20 accomplished students from Smithfield High School to the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference, located at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. This trip was originally intended to have 2 chaperones, being Dana Hughes and Dalton Fisher. However, Hughes had to drop out at the last minute due to appendicitis. Instead of canceling an educational trip and losing funds that the parents paid, Dalton Fisher was allowed to be the sole chaperone of this trip, which fit the conference's 20 students to 1 chaperone policy. Since only responsible, hard-working students were selected to attend the conference, it was fair to trust the students to act maturely, and to follow the rules, including the curfew. However, in an unnecessary attempt to find food due to dizziness, Pat Reynolds and Avery Harris left the hotel, breaking the curfew rule. The plaintiff will try to argue that this action was out of necessity. However, they will neglect to mention that there were vending machines and room service available to the students, as will be explained by Casey Damon later this evening. We will also hear from Dalton Fisher himself, who will explain his fulfillment of chaperone duties. Dalton made himself available to the students, and in response, relayed their own responsibilities. The plaintiff will try to paint Dalton Fisher as a negligent caretaker, and they will try to argue that his actions led to Pat Reynolds' injury. However, Fisher completed all of the duties required of him, and instead Pat Reynolds' irresponsibility created his own downfall. We will also hear from Jamison Manning, the superintendent of Smithville School District for 16 years. She will explain the nature of her decision to allow for the trip even though only 1 chaperone would be attending. After consulting the Youth Leadership Conference, Casey Damon, Dalton Fisher, and the board president, she ultimately made the calculated choice to allow for the trip. She trusted Dalton Fisher and the students to act responsibly and follow the district and conference rules. Dalton Fisher upheld his responsibilities. However, Avery and Pat were the ones who broke the rules, and therefore, Smithville School District and Dalton Fisher should not be held accountable. A guilty verdict calls for the plaintiff's ability to link the harm done, being Pat's coma, and negligent action by the defendant. These simply are not related, as Pat was the one who decided to take the photo that led to his injuries. Through the information provided to you tonight, it will be clear that Pat Reynolds and Avery Harris simply acted irresponsibly and unfortunately have suffered the consequences. I urge you, the jury, to see that the defendants have done no wrong, and instead Pat Reynolds' inability to exercise good judgment has resulted in his coma, and to use this knowledge to make an informed and wise decision. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Plans to go to the first witness?
Yes, plaintiff would like to call Peyton Reynolds to stand.
Thank you.
You can come back this way. Keep your left hand on the Bible. You raise your right hand. You swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And state your name for the record. Thank you. You may be seated.
Good evening, Mrs. Reynolds.
Good evening.
And what is your relationship with Pat Reynolds?
Today I'm here because Pat Reynolds, my son, has been put in a coma due to the irresponsibility, I feel, of Dalton Fisher and Smithville School District.
And what school field trip was your son on when he was put into a coma?
My son was on the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference when he was put into a coma.
And what kind of students are usually given the opportunity to attend this conference?
Smithville School District only sends the creme de la crop of the students, really. They're the most mature, they're always trustworthy, they're just very good students overall.
And based on your experience as a parent of Pat, would you say that Pat had these qualities?
Most definitely.
And what is Pat's medical history like?
Pat actually suffers from bouts of dizziness where he feels nauseous, and he usually has to lie down or maybe eat something and then it'll pass.
And when do these dizzy spells usually happen to Pat?
The spells are completely random. They're never really predictable. He could get them in school, at home, we never really know.
And how did you alert the school on this field trip that Pat had these spells?
Pat has been to the nurse's office multiple times because of the dizzy spells, but other than that, I have notified the school via paperwork.
And on this field trip, had Pat ever been on the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference field trip before?
Yeah, he attended last year. He really enjoyed the trip.
And this year, what were you expecting of the trip for him?
I was expecting the trip to go as well as last year's did. Pat had such a great time. I only hope for the best.
And do you know who the chaperone was on last year's trip?
Last year, I believe the main chaperone was Hughes.
And this year, what did you learn about the change in chaperone?
I actually got a call from Pat the day before the trip. He sounded very dejected, saying that the trip would be canceled because Dana Hughes had come down with appendicitis, I believe, and he said that Dalton Fisher might be the only chaperone, so the trip might be canceled.
And based on what Pat has told you, what do you think about Dalton Fisher as a teacher?
Pat has told me that Dalton Fisher wasn't really much of a teacher. He had been very forgetful in the past.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Sustained.
Pat?
Agreed with.
Let's move on to the next question. What did you learn about the chaperone change this year when Mr. Dalton Fisher was going to be chaperone?
I learned that Dana Hughes had come down with appendicitis, and I was really upset because I wanted Pat to have gone on the trip and had a good time because I knew he really enjoyed it last year.
And this year, what action did you take once you learned that Mr. Dalton Fisher was going to be the chaperone?
I knew that Pat had told me that the trip might be canceled, and I really wanted him to go because he enjoyed it so much. So I called Jameson Manning, the superintendent, and informed him of the Metropolitan Hotel's 20-to-1 student-to-chaperone policy, and that they could actually go.
And this year, did Pat end up going on this trip?
Right. The Smithville School District, they did adapt their policy as I reminded them.
And on this trip, how did you first learn of Pat's accident on the first night?
I actually got a call from Avery Harris at like 2:45 in the morning, and I was really shocked and upset, of course, for my son, and then I was so upset as to why the school didn't call me first and why I had to learn from Pat's friend instead of the people responsible for my son.
So Dalton Fisher did not call you this night?
No, he did not.
And where was Dalton Fisher when he got that call?
I thought that Dalton Fisher would have been with my son at the hospital, but instead I found out that he was still at the hotel.
No further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Peyton Reynolds, were you aware that Dalton Fisher was the other chaperone on this field trip?
I got a call from Pat saying that Dana Hughes was out, but Dalton Fisher would be the only chaperone on the trip.
So, were you aware of any of Dalton Fisher's characteristics before the trip?
I knew what... I'd heard of stories of him only from Pat.
So, knowing this information about Dalton Fisher, you did not voice any concern, correct?
Pat had always had a great time on the trip, and I trusted that Dalton Fisher would be an adequate chaperone on the trip.
And is it true that after hearing about the cancellation of the trip, you called the school to convince them on continuing the trip?
I simply reminded them of a policy that the hotel had in hopes that they could continue the trip.
So you did explicitly provide the hotel's 20-to-1 chaperone ratio, making the trip possible, correct?
The school had already known that, but yes, I did.
So just to clarify, you yourself provided the piece of evidence that allowed for the school to continue,
I
right?
reminded them, yes.
And knowing full well that the school would only send one chaperone, were you comfortable with the reduced ratio?
I trusted that the school would take proper care of my son, so I was comfortable.
So just to clarify, you were absolutely certain that the reduced ratio would not be a problem.
Yes, I was trusting the school.
And at the end of the day, you ultimately gave Pat permission to go on a trip, correct?
Yes.
Now, is it correct that the school required you to fill out a permission slip?
Yes, it is.
Permissions, I would like to address Joint Exhibit 1 of opposing counsel. Okay, counsel. Permission to approach the witness.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could you show Joint Exhibit 1 to your adversary? Okay. Yes. Okay. Sorry.
Can you please refresh your memory on what this document shows?
This is the medical portion of this field trip permission slip that I have to fill out.
And it's correct that you signed this permission slip, correct?
Yes, it is.
Did you read to the jury what this box specifically says?
It reads, please out any concerns of which the chaperone should be aware.
And could you tell the jury what you specifically filled out in that box?
I did not fill anything out because dizzy spells are pretty self-explanatory. You know, if Pat would have gotten dizzy, he would have. That's basically the only symptom I could have.
So is it correct that you did not provide the information of food on the permission slip?
No, I did not.
So you did not explicitly make it known that the permission on the permission slip, that in addition to dizzy spells, Pat required food to deal with the situation.
He did not require food. It was only one of the methods that he could to alleviate the dizziness.
And did you provide any other way for school to require this information?
Well, I had written down the prescription drug that he takes, Alidase, but other than that, I did not include food.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Yeah, you can have the, do you want to redirect? No, okay. Thank you very much. Just 1 minute. Counsel, ready for the next witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
And who would that be?
I just would like to call Avery Harris.
Thank you. Mr. Harris, want to come up?
Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Can you state your name for the record and spell your last name, please?
Avery Harris, last name is Harris.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Harris.
Good evening.
Could you please state your name for the record?
My name is Avery Harris.
Are you presently a student?
Yes, I'm majoring in political science and a minor in theater at Metropolitan University.
Now, how do you know Pat Reynolds?
Pat and I go way back. He's not my best friend, but we've been pretty close. And we were roommates at the Metropolitan Leadership Conference.
And what exactly is this youth leadership conference?
This conference is basically designed for students in the surrounding metropolitan area to discuss things such as leadership, giving back to the community, and learning your place in society.
And who hosts this conference?
The conference is hosted by the Metropolitan Hotel, and the school is responsible for supervising over the students since it's an off-campus event.
And who from the school was in charge of you and the other classmates during this trip?
I'm sorry. Mr. Dalton Fisher was in charge of the 20 students that were there.
Do you know the defendant, Mr. Dalton Fisher, from before the trip?
Yeah, I was a student in his class.
And based on your experiences as a student of his, how was Mr. Fisher as a teacher?
Quite honestly, I don't think he was much of a teacher at all. He was very inconsiderate. When we tried going to him for help, he didn't really listen to us. He was very self-centered.
Now on to the conference itself. Could you briefly run through the morning schedule for us?
Yeah, we got to the hotel around 8:30 or so, then we had workshops, and then we had lunch.
And did you get to have dinner later on?
Yeah, after a couple other workshops in the afternoon, we had dinner.
And where did you go for dinner?
Both Pat and I went to the Metropolitan Cafe, although we really didn't eat much. It was pretty bad.
And what did you do after you ate dinner?
After eating the dinner, we returned to the hotel with an empty stomach.
And did the defendant say anything to you before all the students went up for the night?
Yeah, before we went to the rooms, Mr. Fisher had warned of a college party. We obviously weren't able to go, and we considered it for that matter.
Was Pat aware of this party?
Although Pat didn't tell me anything himself, I'm sure he knew it was just a rumor.
Now, how was Pat feeling at this point?
Quite honestly, Pat was feeling pretty bad at this point.
Do you know if Pat has any special medical condition?
Yeah, Pat often gets nauseous, dizzy, lightheaded, he has an upset stomach if he doesn't have some food.
And how exactly can these symptoms be alleviated?
The best solution that he knows of is to eat an adequate amount of food.
So, after he told you that he was not feeling well, what did he do?
So the first thing he did was try to tell Mr. Fisher, obviously you'd want to go to your chaperone in such an emergency.
And what was the defendant's response?
Mr. Fisher just brushed it off. He said to find some food.
Could you go to the hotel restaurants?
No, we weren't allowed to.
Were there refrigerators in the rooms?
Although I didn't check myself, Pat made it very clear we had to leave the room.
Could you get room service?
No, Mr. Well, even though we weren't allowed to leave our rooms, obviously Pat was in such a critical condition that he needed food immediately. So we tried going to the hotel gift shop, but there wasn't food there either because it was closed.
So where did you go from the gift shop?
Well, given the situation, we had to leave the hotel.
So why did you feel the need to leave the hotel?
Quite honestly, Pat was in such a terrible condition that he needed food immediately, and since there wasn't anything available at the hotel itself, we had to leave and find food at the nearest local restaurant.
So did you find the restaurant?
No, we weren't able to.
And was Pat feeling any better as time went on?
Eventually, after walking for a bit, Pat did feel a bit better, and he did tell me that.
And then what happened next?
After that, we decided to turn around and return to the hotel as soon as possible, and Pat eventually climbed up a billboard to take a selfie.
And what's a selfie?
A selfie is when a person takes a picture of him or herself and the area in the back.
And then what happened?
And then Pat fell and he hit his head.
And what did you do at that point?
It was such an emergency that the first thing I did was call the ambulance. Help did come immediately, and Pat was in the hospital. I also called Pat's parents to make them aware of the situation.
Why didn't you call the defendant, your chaperone?
I obviously would have, but we weren't given Mr. Fisher's contact information.
Why didn't you call the hotel?
The same thing. We weren't given the hotel's number, although I definitely would have if we were.
Based on your experiences and observations at the conference, was Mr. Fisher a responsible chaperone?
I do not think Mr. Fisher was responsible chaperone.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross-examination?
Your Honor. Mr. Harris, isn't it true that you were repeatedly informed of the rules of this conference?
As every other student was, yes.
And weren't you rebriefed of these rules and specifically reminded to not sneak out of the hotel?
It was an emergency, which is why we did, but yes.
But based on all this information, knowing about the rules of the conference, you still decided to breach them?
My friend was in such a terrible condition that we had to.
Now I'd like to take a look at Joint Exhibit 6.
Yes.
Permission to approach the witness. Mr. Harris, can you identify this document?
Yes, this is the schedule of the Metropolitan Leadership Conference that was followed on September 27th, 2013.
And can you please explain to me what you were supposed to be doing from noon to 1:30 p.m.?
From that time, we were supposed to have lunch by ourselves.
And what were you doing from 5 to 7 p.m.?
We were supposed to have dinner, and that was again by ourselves.
So, based on this information and this free time, you and Pat didn't attempt to find any food that you could bring back to your room?
Again, we thought there would be food at the hotel. The food at the Metropolitan Cafe was pretty bad, so we expected there would be food in the refrigerators or something else nearby.
Did you attempt to check this before you went out for the day?
Although I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Did you attempt to check for food in the hotel before you left for the day?
No, we expected to find some decent food at the cafe. Both Pat and I didn't really eat much.
Now, when you left your hotel room, did you attempt to speak to any management or security when you got to the ground floor?
No, I didn't.
So even in a situation of emergency, when you felt that you had to leave the hotel, you didn't think of asking any adult?
We went to Mr. Fisher, and he said to find some food, so we followed his instructions.
And isn't it true that you've negatively characterized Dalton Fisher in the past?
He's a pretty bad teacher, yeah.
Now, do you have any relatives living on campus?
I have a cousin, but we're not very close.
Did you attempt to contact this cousin at all?
No, not really.
So even in a situation of emergency, you didn't try to contact anyone that you knew on campus or in the area?
Again, I think the best solution is to find the chaperone, the person responsible, and Mr. Fisher wasn't there, even though he tried twice.
Now I'd like to take a look at Joint Exhibit 3. Permission to approach the witness?
Yes.
Can you identify this document?
Yeah, this is the map of Metropolitan City and the surrounding area around the hotel.
And can you explain to me the path that you and Pat took when you left the hotel?
Yes, so we exited the hotel, we went left on 2nd Street, then we turned right onto Park Place, then we turned left on 3rd Street, and then we turned right onto Green Street.
Now, isn't it true that there are restaurants closer to where you left?
Yeah, and we would have gone to them, although they were closed at the time. It was pretty late.
Can you please read to me right here?
It says, with restaurants open at time of injury.
So isn't it true that these restaurants were indeed open at the time?
They were, however, we didn't see any. This is located on the corner, so is that.
So you didn't attempt to find any restaurants in the immediate area before you left?
We would have, however, we weren't able to find anything.
Now, did you try to stop Pat at all when he jumped up on the billboard?
I did try to advise him, but I let him go.
So even though you knew that he was in a very bad condition, you still allowed him to jump up?
He was feeling a bit better, so I let him. I did let him go up.
And have you received any consequences for leaving the hotel?
No.
You haven't received any consequences? I'd like to take a look at your affidavit. Permission to search a witness?
Yes.
Can you please read to me right here?
What page are you on?
We're on page 54.
Thank you.
I got suspended from school because I left the hotel after curfew. It's not my fault that Dalton Fisher wasn't in his or her room and wouldn't let us get room service.
Thank you. So you did receive consequences.
Yes, but that was after the fact.
And what have you expressed that you would like to happen to Dalton Fisher?
I hope that he can be held responsible for his recklessness and inability to help us in time of need.
Thank you. No further questions.
Is there any redirect for this?
No.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Mr. Harris, you step down. Council, before you have witness.
I'd like to call Billy Thompson to stand.
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
State your name and spell your last name for the record, please.
Bailey Thompson, Thomson.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Thompson.
Good evening, Mr. Thompson. Good evening. How are you currently employed?
I'm the owner and founder of BT Educational Services, which specializes in analyzing school districts in regards to accountability.
And before you were employed here, where did you work at?
I was in the field of education for 34 years, first 15 of which I was a classroom teacher, then became assistant principal, then principal.
And while you were assistant principal, did you pursue any other types of education?
While serving as principal, I got my superintendent certification from Metropolitan University, and then I became superintendent for 12 years.
And where were you superintendent at?
I was superintendent at the Saratoga Independent School District.
And after leaving your superintendency at the Saratoga Independent School District, how did you decide to continue to offer the educational community?
I continued to serve the educational community after leaving my superintendent position by founding BT Educational Services, which allows me to give my knowledge to other school districts across New Jersey.
Your Honor, I'd like to reconfirm the stipulation that Billy Thompson is an expert in educational management and in school leadership.
Any objection?
No objection.
So qualified.
And on to the case at hand. Have you ever given this sort of advice before?
I've given this sort of advice to over 10 school districts in the state of New Jersey.
And when you're looking at this case and giving today's testimony, what materials do you review?
I have thoroughly analyzed all the affidavits and interviewed all the witnesses to compile my final report.
And after reviewing all the affidavits and interviewing all the witnesses, what have you found about today's case?
After reviewing all the documents, I have found a gross dereliction of responsibilities at the Smithville School District in Dalton Fisher.
And beginning with the Smithville School District, what have you first found about their medical policy?
I found that their medical policy is extremely irresponsible because they do not perform any follow-up checks that they get from the paperwork with the information they have on the product.
And what do you believe is wrong with their paperwork policy?
Their paperwork policy allows parents only 1 week to submit the paperwork, which I believe is not enough time to get all the information across, I think.
And what do you usually recommend for submitting paperwork?
I recommend 2 weeks because to ensure the accuracy of all the information on the permission slips.
And next, what do you believe about the Smithfield School District 15-to-1 student to faculty ratio?
While the 15-to-1 student to faculty ratio is bad, it is even worse that they changed it without proper verification.
And what did the Smithfield School District change this policy to?
They changed this policy to a 20-to-1 policy, which is even less safe.
And what do you believe is the optimal policy for the most safety of the students?
Through my experiences, I have found a 10-to-1 policy is the best policy to ensure the safety of everyone. That is the top priority of any school district on overnight trips.
And how do you feel about Jameson Manning, the superintendent of the school, unilaterally changing this policy?
I believe that Jameson Manning, that unilaterally changing his policy is extremely irresponsible because a proper board verification is not only what I believe is correct, but also what the Smithfield School District needs.
And the chaperone on the trip, Mr. Dalton Fisher, how was he trained?
Dalton Fisher was trained with the principle of common sense, which is okay in some instances.
And why was principle of common sense not okay in this instance?
Because common sense is not okay in this instance, because this instance was an emergency, and in emergencies, chaperones need proper training to know how to deal with them.
And on this trip, did Dalton Fisher perform his job adequately?
Dalton Fisher did not perform his job adequately in 2 key instances.
And what was the first instance of Dalton Fisher's breach of responsibility?
There was one documented time where Dalton Fisher did not make himself available to students, which, as we know, should be a chaperone's first priority.
And how did Dalton Fisher deal with a rumor of a party on a nearby college campus?
Dalton Fisher handled the rumor of a party very unprofessionally, not only saying it in a sarcastic manner, but failing to alert the Smithfield School District or the hotel of this rumored party.
And how did Dalton Fisher keep in contact with the students during this field trip?
Actually, Dalton Fisher did not provide any of his emergency contact information, which, as we've seen today, is crucial to this case.
And so with all this in mind, do you think the Smithfield School District did a good job in constructing this field trip?
I believe through this might report that the Smithfield School District did not perform a good job in constructing this field trip.
And do you believe Dalton Fisher performed his job adequately as a responsible chaperone?
Through those 2 key instances, I believe that Dalton Fisher did not perform adequately as a chaperone.
Thank you. No further questions.
Correspondence.
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Bailey Thompson, are you being paid to testify in court?
I'm being paid $500 per hour, which I have found to be the standard fee.
And who is paying you today?
The Smithfield School District is the plaintiff, Peyton Reynolds, is paying me to analyze these.
So it's correct that you're being reimbursed to analyze the legal conditions in this trip, correct?
That is the standard procedure in consulting work, yes.
And in your years of experience, the school has a legal obligation to which party to ensure the security of the children?
The school has a legal obligation to the children and to the parents.
To the parents, correct?
Yes.
So to clarify, the school establishes this student chaperone ratio to maintain student safety and towards obligation to the parents, correct?
Yes.
And since parents consented and even pushed for 20-to-1 student chaperone ratio, isn't the goal of the ratio fulfilled?
The ratio, I still believe the ratio is unsafe, even no matter what school district policy was.
Could you please answer the question I specifically asked you? Since the parents consented, is the goal of the ratio fulfilled?
One parent consented to this golden ratio, and as we know, there are 20 students on this trip, and 19 of those parents signed off on a 15-to-1 student ratio.
And isn't it true that Superintendent Jameson Manning even ordered extra security to compensate for this breach?
Okay.
And is it true that Jameson Manning confirmed the 20-to-1 breach and did not act unilaterally?
He did not have proper verification from the entire board.
And does common sense apply to the expected conduct of the chaperones?
Yes.
And in your expert opinion, was it even possible for Dalton Fisher to be by Pat Reynolds' side 24/7?
No, but there is a key instance where he was not even in his room.
And is there any possibility, is it even possible for Dalton Fisher to predict the exact time that he was needed?
Dalton Fisher did not make himself available to Pat Reynolds, which is his first priority no matter what his other instances should be.
I'm asking you, is it reasonable for him to predict the exact moment that he's needed?
No.
Okay, thank you. And if Dalton seems inaccessible, are there any other ways for the student to contact or try to contact Dalton Fisher?
There are some, but in times of emergency, steps have to be taken to ensure that a medical condition such as Pat's needs to be
So just to clarify, you have told me that there are other ways and other options, correct?
But sometimes the emergency calls for immediate remedy to the situation.
And under school policies, does the student have the obligation to follow school rules?
Yes.
And so Pat is responsible for not breaking school rules, correct?
Yes.
And did Pat break school rules under examination of the offense?
He did it in a time of emergency, which needs to be corrected.
Thank you. You already answered my question. So, under your review, what is the purpose of the permission slip?
The purpose of the permission slip is to make sure the parents are aware of all the school rules.
So, just to clarify, the Smithville School District provides a permission slip to be aware of special accommodations for the students, correct?
That's correct.
And you carefully analyzed Pat Reynolds' permission slip, correct?
I did.
And does the school provide spaces on the permission slip for parents to fill out any medical concerns?
Yeah, there is, yes.
And was there any area on the permission slip that Peyton Reynolds filled out food as a medical concern?
There is not, because the symptom is unpredictable, and so there is no actual place that Peyton Reynolds could have put that down on her permission slip.
Is food and dizziness a symptom that should be communicated to the school?
It is, and on the permission slip, dizzy spells are specified as a medical condition.
But is food specified on the permission slip?
It's only one of the many ways to remedy this unpredictable situation that we don't know exactly how to fix this problem.
Should Peyton Reynolds have provided all the information to provide for the best knowledge and response to this emergency?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And does the school have procedures to communicate medical concerns to the school nurse if the information was adequately provided?
They do, yes.
And does the school have emergency procedures to bring medical reference records onto the drip just in case of accidents?
They do, yes.
And does the school in some way, shape, or form provide information meetings with chaperones to discuss the conduct?
There is, but Dalton did miss that meeting because he was grading papers.
And did you analyze all instances under the school?
Can you repeat the question?
Did you review every single instance in which the school tried to contact Dalton Fisher?
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. No, we're good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is the defense ready to start their case?
Just a moment. The defense calls Jameson Manning to stand.
Put your left hand, raise your right. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Can you state your name and spell your last name for the record?
Jameson Manning, M-A-N-N-I-N-G.
Thank you.
Jameson Manning, what is your current occupation?
I'm currently the superintendent of schools at the Smithville School District.
And do you have an educational background?
I do.
And where did you receive this educational background?
I got my bachelor's degree from Metropolitan University, which is the same university in which I received my bachelor's and doctorate in educational leadership.
And as superintendent of the Smithville School District, what are some changes that you've seen over the past few years?
Really, I've seen changes of accountability measures in relationship to technology.
And what are these accountability measures that you bring up?
Well, because schools are prone to lawsuits and things of that nature, it is imperative that we create policies in relationship to the recent surge of technology that include social media on both cell phone and internet platforms, basically saying that there really shouldn't be any communication between teachers and students, and which is in accordance with the federal and local policies.
And what was the response to this new policy?
The staff seemed very responsive to the policy.
And have you ever testified before in court on behalf of Smithville School District?
Yes, I have testified before as a fact witness.
Now, were you aware of the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference on the night of September 27, 2013, involving 20 of the Smithville School District students?
Yes, I am. I signed off on it.
And what is the reason for Smithville's partake in this conference?
Well, this conference is a really great experience for the students as it offers, obviously leadership conference, so there are great opportunities for the students in meetings there. In addition, it offers scholarship money.
And how long has the district been participating in the Metropolitan Youth Leadership?
For as long as I've been here, for the past at least 15 years.
So what were your plans for the 2013 trip?
Well, my plans were to send 20 students with 2 chaperones, Dana Hughes and Dalton Fisher, adhering to our school 15-to-1 ratio.
And could you elaborate more on the school procedures in relation to the field trip?
Yes, basically the chaperones were really in charge of keeping track of the students, obviously, but they weren't expected to be around them 24/7. In addition, the chaperones were supposed to do the 2 nightly room checks.
And did you inform the chaperones of these school policies?
I did.
Now, were there any problems during the planning of the trip?
Yes. Unfortunately, just before the trip, Dana Hughes contracted appendicitis, making her unable to attend the trip.
Did this last-minute change hinder your decision for the trip to continue?
Yes, it did, because with only 1 chaperone, our 15-to-1 policy the trip could not happen because we had 20 students and 1 chaperone, which violated our 15-to-1 student-to-chaperone policy.
Did the Smithville High School partake in the conference this year?
Ultimately, we did.
And how did your decision on whether Smithville partakes in this conference change?
Well, I had a parent, actually Peyton Reynolds, called me and informed me that the conference only required a 20-to-1 ratio, and then I adjusted based on that.
And after hearing about this 20-to-1 ratio, did you immediately change the decision?
No, I did not immediately change my decision. I took other precautions.
And what were these precautions that you took?
Well, I called the hotel and made sure that there would be extra security due to the 1 less chaperone. And then I also rearranged for refunds, but that's really beside the point. And I contacted Dalton Fisher, making sure that he was okay with the last-minute adjustment, and he seemed completely fine with being the only chaperone.
And during the trip, were there any problems?
Yes. Unfortunately, one of the students became injured.
And when did you find out about this accident?
I found out at around 3 in the morning, when one of the hotel staff members called.
And what were your immediate reactionary actions as the superintendent?
Well, I was distraught because at Smithville School District, the safety of our students is first. And since we were only 20 minutes away, I just drove there and as fast as I could, obviously. And then, yeah.
Thank you. No further questions, Your Honor.
Cross.
Yes, Your Honor.
Good evening. And you are the superintendent of the Smithville School District. Is this correct?
Yes.
And your school has had a long history with the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference, correct?
That is correct.
And the teacher Dalton Fisher, who was chaperone this conference, is under your supervision, right? And your school recently, under your directive, has put into place new security policies that prevent the contact of teachers and students. Is this correct?
Prevent the contact through certain means of media.
Yes. And this year, on the Smithville, on the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference trip, there were 20 students attending. Is this correct?
Yes.
And on these trips, your school usually observes a 15-to-1 student to faculty ratio, correct? And so this year, there should have been 2 chaperones going, right?
In best case scenario, yes.
So according to school policy, though, there should have been 2 chaperones going this year. Is this correct?
Yes.
And this year, there were originally going to be 2 chaperones, right?
Yes.
And the 2 chaperones were Dalton Fisher and Miss Dana Hughes. But when Mrs. Dana Hughes came down with appendicitis, you initially believed that you were going to have to cancel the trip. Is this correct?
That's right.
But the trip ultimately wasn't canceled, right? You called Dalton Fisher into your office for a meeting because he was going to be the sole chaperone. Is this correct?
Yes.
And you gave him the impression that you would allow the trip to continue, right?
Yes.
But did you ever you never actually told Dalton Fisher you would allow the trip to continue, right?
No, I told Dalton Fisher that the trip that he was going to be the only chaperone.
Yeah, but you never told him you would allow the trip to continue.
I believe I did.
Additionally, Dalton Fisher didn't actually have a say in in the fact that he would be responsible for 20 students on this trip. Is this correct?
He didn't object to it.
But he didn't tell you he was comfortable being responsible for 20 students. Is this correct?
He didn't say he was uncomfortable.
But this was Dalton Fisher's first time being chaperone. Is this also correct?
Yes, but he has experience attending the conference.
But this was the first time being responsible for students on a field trip, correct?
Yes.
So Dalton Fisher, just to clarify, Dalton Fisher had 20 students on his first time being chaperone, correct?
That's correct.
And on this trip, how were you first notified when Pat was injured?
The hotel called.
And how far was it actually? And your school is only 20 minutes from the hotel, right?
Yes.
And on this trip, you stated that because the hotel was very close, there could be another chaperone company with no problem, correct?
Yes.
But ultimately, there's still only one chaperone on this trip, right?
Yes.
And when you made the decision to change the trip, you called the board president. Is this correct?
Yes.
But usually, your school has to get approval from the entire board. Is this correct?
Yes.
But this time, on this trip, you only called the board president.
We didn't really have enough time to call the entire board.
And you stated that your school does not make special accommodations on these field trips.
Usually, yes.
And this time, you made a change to student-to-faculty ratio and for this special case. Is this correct?
Yes.
So this time, you made an accommodation for the special case. Would you call that a special accommodation?
I would.
Okay. And finally, this year, during the accident, Avery and Pat Reynolds were not able to call Mr. Dalton Fisher. Is this correct?
On a cell phone? Yes.
Yes. And this was due to the technology policy that your school and under your supervision, your school put in place. Is this correct?
Yes.
So under this technology policy, Pat and Avery were not able to get the emergency contact information from Dalton Fisher in the emergency. Is this correct?
There were other ways to contact him other than his cell phone, but as far as cell phone use goes, no, they could not contact him.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Any regret?
Yes, Your Honor. Let's talk about the technology policy. Is it correct that this is in accordance to state, federal, and local laws?
Yes.
And under your actual supervision and decision to specifically allow the trip to continue, did you make any other precautions to ensure the safety of students?
Yes. Just to reiterate, I did, in fact, call the hotel to make sure there would be extra security, and I let Dalton Fisher know as well.
So just to clarify, in addition to knowing about the 20-to-1 student ratio, you provided for more precautions to protect the students, correct?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Next, please.
Good. You want to read those?
No, Troy, you first.
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry, I apologize.
clarify for the jury. On this trip, Dalton Fisher was still the only chaperone, and he was responsible for these students. Is this correct?
Yes.
So Dalton Fisher was looking over these students and was responsible for them at all times, right?
Not 20, you can't hold someone responsible for them 24/7.
Okay. So, but he was responsible for the students when they're out of the hotel and on their meetings. He was responsible. Is this correct?
During the hours in which he was supposed to be responsible for them, yeah.
Yes. So during the extra security in the hotel was only an extra security when they were in their dorms. Is this correct?
Or when they were supposed to be.
Yeah, when they were supposed to be in their dorms. So Dalton Fisher was still the only chaperone taking care of 20 students when they were in their in their workshops during the day. Is this correct?
Yes.
Okay. No further questions.
Thank you.
Defense calls Dalton Fisher.
Stand on the Bible, raise your right. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? State your name and spell it for the record, please.
Dalton Fisher, Fisher.
Mr. Fisher, what is your occupation?
I'm a sophomore U.S. history teacher at Smithville High School.
And how long have you been a teacher?
I've been a teacher for 3 years, 2 years at Smithville High School and 1 year at Metropolitan University.
Now, what's your involvement in the school community outside of the classroom?
I'm involved in the debate club.
And how long have you been involved with the debate club?
I've been involved with the debate club for 2 years now.
And what is your position in the debate club?
I just help out.
And do you have any prior experience with the debate club?
Yes, when I was a student at Smithville High School, I went on the school trip twice, and I was also in the debate club when I was in college at Metropolitan University.
Now, what was the school trip that you went on?
The Youth Leadership Conference.
Now, where were you on the weekend of September 27th, 2013?
I was a chaperone for the Youth Leadership Conference in Metropolitan.
And how did you become the chaperone for this conference?
I was recruited by the head moderator of the Young Leaders Club, which is Dana Hughes, and she approached me and asked me if I'd like to be a chaperone.
And how did you become the sole chaperone of this trip?
Sadly, Dana Hughes got appendicitis and she couldn't attend.
And were you comfortable being the sole chaperone?
I was a little bit worried at first, but of course I didn't want to limit the ability of the students to get scholarships, and also it was supposed to be a learning experience for them.
What were your duties as a chaperone?
When we first boarded the bus, my first duty was to account for all students prior to leaving. When we first arrived at the hotel, I was meant to moderate the students while they were in their workshops, and at the night time, I was meant to do two curfew checks at both 11 p.m. and 12 a.m.
And what was your familiarity with the surrounding area of the conference?
As I said before, I've been on the Youth Leadership Conference twice, so I was very aware of the surrounding area.
And where did you attend college?
I also attended college at Metropolitan University, which is only a couple blocks away from the hotel, so I was also much more aware as well.
Can you please describe the students chosen to attend the trip?
The students that were chosen to attend the trip were very bright and proven to be very responsible, and I felt that they can handle responsibilities many other students could not handle.
And were the students made aware of the behavior expected from them?
Yes, I gave a 15 to 20 minute meeting while in the lobby of the hotel, and I also told them of what I expected of them also on the bus as well.
And were the parents made aware?
Yes, they were.
And did the students and parents in any way confirm that they knew this, or that they knew what was expected?
Yes, all the rules were on their permission slip, which both the students and the parents both either signed or yes, they both signed, yeah.
And what kind of measures did you take to inform the students of what was expected of them upon arrival?
As I said before, I gave a 15 to 20 minute speech or meeting, however you want to say it, in the lobby, which I told them what I expected of them and many of the rules that they're supposed to follow, most important that they're not supposed to leave after curfew.
And did they follow these rules during the day of September 27th?
Yes.
So based on this information, did you doubt that they would be behaving well in the future?
No, I had no reason to believe that they would do anything like that.
And what was your policy regarding curfew and room checks?
I was required to do true curfew checks at both 11 p.m. and 12 a.m.
And I'd like to take a look at Joint Exhibit 2. permission to approach the witness?
Yes.
Can you please read to me the first two sentences under item 8?
Overnight field trips require chaperones to be on the same floor as students, with same hallway when available. 2 room-to-room curfew checks are required.
Now, were you provided with any other information about how you were supposed to conduct these curfew checks?
No.
So where were you at 11 o'clock p.m.?
At 11 p.m., I was doing my first curfew check.
And did you take any other measures to make sure that the students would stay inside their rooms?
Yes, I was informed by Casey Damon, who is the head of security, who informed me that I could put a piece of masking tape on the top right side of the door to ensure that no students leave their room.
And when you made this first curfew check, were there any issues?
No, all students remained inside of their rooms.
And did you perform any other checks that night?
Yes, at 12 a.m. I conducted a second curfew check.
And was all the tape still in place at that time?
Yes, all the tape remained on the doors, which made me believe that all students were in the room.
Now, what did you do after this final curfew check?
After the final curfew check, I stayed outside in the hallway for a couple minutes to ensure that no students were doing anything wrong and staying in their rooms. And then after that, I went back to my room and did a last-minute grading.
And at what time did you go to sleep?
I went to sleep at around 12:40 a.m.
And how did you find out about Pat Reynolds' injury?
Casey Damon informed me of his injury at around 3 a.m.
What was your reaction to this information?
I was very shocked, and I tried to find out as much information as possible.
And based on all the rules provided to you, were there any policies that you were supposed to follow that you did not follow?
I believe I followed every single policy I was required to.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Mr. Fisher, this conference was the first time you served as lead chaperone, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
In fact, it was the first time you served as chaperone at all. Is that also correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And to clarify, you were the sole chaperone on this trip.
Yes, sadly, Dana Hughes, the other chaperone, got appendicitis.
And since you were the only chaperone on the trip, the ratio, the student-faculty ratio, became 20 to 1. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And to clarify, the Board of Education in the school signed off for 15 to 1, not 20 to 1.
Yes.
And in your sworn statement, you stated that if the trip were canceled, it would be a nightmare to give back money to the students and to hear of all the complaints from parents.
But I still like to do that.
And you were also very excited because the new Star Wars film was premiering. Is that correct?
Yes, and sadly, I haven't seen it yet.
In fact, you stated that you figured that you could see the movie on the second day of the conference when you had a few hours of free time to sightsee. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So even after you were briefed by your superiors, you deemed it all right to relieve yourself during free time?
Yes.
And later in the day, Pat Reynolds came to you and saying that he wasn't feeling well. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And as chaperone, you are aware of Pat's medical condition.
Yes.
But when he told you that he needed food, you said, find some food. Correct?
Yes. The students were able to get lunch, and they're also able to get dinner, so I felt it'd be no problem that he'd be able to get food.
Well, this was after dinner, after lunch.
Yes.
And you were aware that there was no food in the refrigerators as per your request, correct?
Yeah.
And that they couldn't use the hotel restaurants.
Yes.
And that they couldn't use room service.
Yes.
Now, you were also aware of a rumored party at the Metropolitan campus, correct?
Yes.
And despite having foreknowledge of the supposed party, you used just the tape trick to make sure the students were in their rooms at 12.
Throughout the day, the students did very well, and I felt there would be no problem, and no students would escape their rooms, so I felt that was perfectly fine to do.
But nonetheless, you were aware of a supposed party.
Yes, I was aware of rumors that went around about the parties.
And you were aware of ways to circumvent the tape trick, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
So you did not make sure the students were physically in their rooms.
I think any reasonable person wouldn't wake students up at 12 in the morning when they have a very big day the next day, so I felt that the tape would suffice.
So no, you did not physically check to see whether they're in the rooms.
On my second curfew check, I did not check to see if they were in the rooms physically.
And when this incident occurred, you were informed of what happened through Casey Damon, is that correct?
Yes, Casey Damon informed me of the incident.
And the students couldn't contact you because they did not have any contact information for you.
Yes, because of the policy, I was not allowed to give them my contact information.
But you do realize that chaperones, according to the guidelines, must make arrangements to contact chaperones for emergency situations, correct?
Yes, students could have used the phones to contact me in my room.
But you weren't in your room when the students went to find you, is that correct?
Of course I was. How else could I have done my curfew checks?
No, you were not in your room when Pat went to you.
Yes, I was.
And also, you never followed up on the problem of Pat needing food.
I thought he found food and he was okay.
Well, he never told you that.
Yes, he did not tell me that.
And you do know that you never called the hotel to let them know of these changes, correct?
I'm sorry, what do you mean by exchanges?
No, you did not communicate to the hotel of the changes beforehand.
Changes of what?
That Dana Hughes would not be going and you would be the only chaperone.
Jameson Manning did.
But you did not you did not provide your information to the hotel.
Yes, I did not provide that. I would be the sole chaperone. Jameson Manning did.
And you also did not provide your personal contact information for the hotel.
Yes.
So they did not have your number.
Yes.
Thank you. No further questions.
Is there any request?
Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Fisher, were you fully aware of the rules of the conference and what was expected of you?
Yes.
And can you please once again describe the students chosen to attend the trip?
The students that were allowed to go on the trip were very bright and they proved to be very responsible and that they could handle very many things that regular students cannot.
So did you believe that they needed constant supervision?
Although I believe that they didn't need constant supervision, I always knew where they were and I always had sight of them so I wouldn't lose track of where they were.
And did you see the Star Wars movie on the weekend of the trip?
No, I did not.
Thank you. No further questions.
Any request?
Yes. Now, although you did not go to the Star Wars film, you did express that you figured that you could see it on the second day, correct?
Yes.
Step down, thank you very much.
Next witness.
Defense calls Casey Damon.
Left hand on the Bible, right hand up. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Can you state your name and spell your last name, please?
Casey Damon, D-A-M-O-N.
You may proceed.
Ms. Damon, where are you employed?
I'm employed at the Metropolitan Hotel.
And how long have you been employed there?
6 years.
What are your responsibilities at the hotel?
I oversee guest rooms and conference rooms.
And where were you educated?
I graduated from Metropolitan University, majoring in restaurant and hospitality management.
Now, what is your affiliation with the Metropolitan Youth Leadership Conference?
I'm usually the host of the conferences.
And what kind of security measures does your hotel take in preparation for this conference?
We have extra security guards in addition to the usual number of security guards we have.
And is there any video surveillance in your hotel?
Yes, we do. We usually have 1 or 2 surveillance cameras in each hallway.
Was there video surveillance from the Youth Leadership Conference?
No, because nobody requested them to be seen.
And what is done with the film if it's not requested to be seen?
We always delete the video 30 days if no request that we make to be seen.
Now, how do you arrange rooms of chaperones and students?
We arrange the rooms with the students and the teachers really close to each other.
What kind of accommodations does your hotel have?
We have restaurants, we have conference rooms, and we also have guest rooms.
And did students have full access to all these accommodations?
No, the school ordered us not to have students access all the restaurants
And what was the reasoning behind this?
because they want to prevent the students from running up a bill.
Was there any other kind of access to food in your hotel for the students?
Yes, we do have soda machines on every single floor in the hotel. We also have a snack machine on the ground floor.
And is there any food available inside the rooms?
We do have mini fridges.
And did the students at Smithville High School have access to these mini fridges?
No, the school ordered us not to have the students have access to the food in the fridges.
And what was the reasoning behind this?
Also, they want to prevent the students from running up a bill.
So based on... Now, are there phones inside the rooms with the ability to contact other rooms?
Yes, it's really simple. You just have to dial star and the room number.
Now, on the evening of September 27th, did you see Dalton Fisher at all?
Yes.
And did you speak with Dalton Fisher?
Yes. I told him about the door taping strategy.
And can you describe the strategy for me?
You just have to tape the door, put masking tape on the door, so when a student leaves the room, you can tell.
Now, were there any incidents over the weekend of the conference?
Yes, there was.
And what was this incident?
A student from Smithville High School named Pat Reynolds got injured, and she got into an accident and fell to a coma.
And how were you informed of this injury?
I got a call from the front desk at 2:45 in the morning.
What kind of action did you take after you got this information?
I called Dalton Fisher and I even left a message for him.
And were you ever able to tell Dalton Fisher what had happened?
I guess I left a message.
Did you speak to Dalton Fisher at all after?
Yes, I did.
And did Fisher attempt to find any other information about why this accident may have happened?
Yes, he woke up the other students and talked to them about it.
And did Fisher mention any cause of why the students would be leaving the hotel?
Yes, as I mentioned before, it was some college parties that kids probably shouldn't have gone to.
And now, over the course of the night, did you ever see Dalton Fisher leave the hotel?
No.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you very much. Cross-examination.
Now, your job as manager of Grand Metropolitan entails many responsibilities, correct?
Yes.
And included in those is that of hosting the youth leadership conference.
Yes, I'm usually there.
And as such, you had an extra 3 staff members working that night.
Yes.
And it is still expected that the school chaperones will fulfill their responsibilities as well, correct?
Yes, so we mainly follow what the board is to do.
And you stated that each of the conference students were not allowed to use the hotel restaurants.
Yes.
And all teachers and chaperones, including the defendant, were made aware of this policy, correct?
All students and teachers.
And the chaperones also were able to request that the refrigerators in the rooms be empty, correct?
Yes, but there was a reason beyond that, yes.
And the defendant did that as well. Now, in regards to the logistics of the conference, you stated that you had been discussing room arrangements with Dana Hughes, correct?
Yes.
And when the defendant arrived without Dana Hughes, he did not mention any of these room arrangements. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he did not express any concerns. He said nothing.
Well, being the one sole chaperone, I guess he did have concerns, but it wasn't part of our hotel's job to talk about that.
Now, later that night, when you ran into this defendant, you spoke briefly, correct?
Yes.
And you discussed the tape trick that Dana Hughes had used in years past.
Yes.
So the defendant, who assumed Dana Hughes' role as lead chaperone, was completely unaware of this trick until you informed him, correct?
Well, it was a really common trick, so I guess people would know,
But-
especially as chaperones.
But he did not know.
I wouldn't know about that,
We were the one to teach him about the tape trick, correct?
just in case, yes.
Now on to when the incident actually occurred. When you called the defendant's room to inform him, there was no response, correct?
Yes.
And you could not call. So when the school did not inform you of any of these changes until the morning of.
Yes, because it was a last minute change after all.
And when you finally found the defendant, you stated that you bumped into him in the hallway, correct?
Yes, I did.
And you stated that, upon telling him, that he was very upset, grumbling something about the college party the kids shouldn't be going to, correct? Though he knew of this party, the students managed to leave the hotel. Is that correct?
Well, it was the student's responsibility. Well, it was their problem for not following what they were supposed to do.
But the chaperone is the one responsible for the students in ensuring that these rules are followed, correct?
He did have a talk with them.
And the chaperone was completely unaware of what had happened until you bumped into him that night.
I
correct?
believe he got informed because he happened to be leaving when I bumped into him in the hallway.
But he never said this.
Well, I did call him, but there could have been people with the telephone to the room, so I
But-
guess he might have been leaving.
You guessed that he was puking.
I even left a message, so there's no way he didn't hear the message.
But he did not respond to clarify, correct?
Yes, it was emergency, so I guess he would be, like, as quick as possible, like, if the student informed.
Thank you. No further questions.
Redirect.
Not necessary, Your Honor.
That concludes the presentation for both sides then, as far as witnesses go. Thank you, Ms. Damon. Counsel, we're going to take a short break so that they can. Yes, they can do their closings, right? We'll give you a few minutes to get your affairs in order. Mr. Brown, you'll be summing up, and Mr. Wayne, you'll be summing up.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are here to find the true party responsible for the accident of Pat Reynolds. Despite how unfortunate Pat's condition may seem, do not let emotions cloud the true facts presented to you today. Based on the evidence and what you have heard today, the answer is crystal clear. The injury of Pat Reynolds is in fact not caused by the actions of Donald Fisher, nor is it caused by the school board. Instead, it was Pat's own breach in the mandatory curfew, as well as Pat Reynolds' failure to communicate crucial health conditions to the school that ultimately led to his accident. Even worse, it was specifically Pat Reynolds' own decision to push for a school trip that ultimately led to his accident and made it even possible. Now, we have heard major concessions on the plaintiff's side today. From Peyton, we have heard that it was ultimately her decision to allow Pat Reynolds onto the trip, and that she even pushed for the trip relentlessly, reminding the school of the 20-to-1 student-chaperone ratio, suggesting that she was very comfortable with the ratio. Even worse, she utterly failed to provide information regarding food conditions to the school as well as to Donald Fisher, making it impossible for the school or the chaperone to know about these special conditions, making it not reasonable for the school to even be responsible for the information. Next, we heard from Bailey Thompson that the 20-to-1 breach was parent approved and even fortified with extra security provided by Janice Manning after considerable. Also, we heard that the limitations to chaperones exist and that they cannot be with the students 24/7 of the day. And even if they were unaccessible, there are other options available to Pat